All right, back with another landscape here. Got another landscape that is really not meant for lizards. It's really just meant for like a conversation piece for your living room or bedroom. We've got a ice waterfall or an iceberg waterfall. Just really after I'd done that winter waterfall, which is on the channel, had always thought it would be interesting to try to create a waterfall that looked as if it was made out of ice. So I would consider this project to be more of a beginner leaning towards intermediate, primarily based on the fact that the color scheme, the paint job that is, was so easy. So it's really just, you know, using white and varying shades of blue to create this look of ice. So using some of the same techniques that I used in the winter waterfall. So I've got that secret ingredient to create the ice. You can see the icicles here. But yeah, the color scheme is so easy that this is definitely one that if you're a beginner or intermediate, you'd want to try. Be sure and check out the intermission. It's in the middle, but you can jump to it with this little tab. Just in case you're one of those that just watches the beginnings of these videos and doesn't necessarily want to follow along to build this. But so an ice waterfall here, looking obviously at pictures of icebergs to get inspiration and trying to figure out the color scheme, but really just a simplistic paint job and it doesn't really need anything more as far as detail to convey that idea of ice. So seeing the back here where you've got the second piece, I can lift up on that so the cords would go out the back. Got the water pump there and seeing how the water comes out of there and flowing down into the pond, and then it basically just cycles back through the same path each time. So let's go ahead and build an ice waterfall. So as always, you want to have some sort of protective gear. So I've been using this several years now, just a really professional way of protecting yourself from the fumes. And using, since I think 2011, a couple of hot wires from the hot wire foam factory, and I'm near an open window, so I can have, want to have adequate ventilation when cutting through styrofoam. So here are those hot wires, tools, sort of a straight one, and then more of a flexible sculpting tool. So this ice waterfall is based on a couple of different waterfalls I've done in the past. One, the beginner waterfall here, and then the small tabletop waterfall, which is shown here. And usually I will do a basic sketch to try to flesh out, how I want this to look. See the two pieces of ice there and the water going in between them. So this is how it all started, where I've got the water pump and I'm going around and creating sort of this buffer zone where the water is going to be. What I really should have done is had that be almost twice as big, because it was a little bit difficult, as you'll see later in the video, getting my hand in there to try to get all the silicone in there. So it was a little bit cramped and trying to get my hand in there. So what I'm doing is drawing out what I believe to be the pond shape, and I'll change my mind quite a bit. That's why you saw all those different lines. So measuring out 3.5 inches for the height of those pieces that are going to make up the pond. So cutting through that. And so I've got this, and I'll create several other of those pieces of the same 3.5 inches tall. Then I'm going to go ahead and cut out a whole bunch of different varying size pieces, because I know I'm going to have to go around those corners and curves that are in the pond. And I'm just kind of without glue, put these down to sort of just like a guess And then once I figure out and kind of commit to the shape of the pond, I'm going to go ahead and glue this down. And check out the materials list video that will go through all of the materials, including the glue that I'm using here. So measuring out the top, and what I'm trying to do is measure out a little bit above the water pump height to create a whole bunch of pieces that will be taller than the water pump, because you want to leave a little bit of a gap there. And so gluing all of these pieces around there and sort of creating that section or area that the water pump is going to live. Because part of this, I would say a major part of this project and any other waterfall project I've done, is to try to camouflage the water pump. So here you've got a little area, and I've got these all over the project, as I always do. These little gaps where you want to try to fill these in as best you can. And here is a little difficult to explain, but I'm trying to trace the inside of the pond. If you have really thick foam, you wouldn't have to do this as I've done on the winter waterfall. You could just start cutting into the foam to create the ponds, but I'm tracing the inside of it because I had run out of thicker foam. So I've got these two pieces that basically make up the bottom, and which I will create more pieces that look exactly like this and try to build it up so it reaches the top of the height of the pond. And tracing around that piece on some scrap pieces to try to create a whole bunch that look exactly like each other that will go in there, so that I can create sort of this look where it is sloping downward from the top. I've got all these, and what I'm going to do is put glue just on the outside side of these pieces, because I know I'm not going to take the hot wire through the edge. It's just going to be the center, and you really just need enough glue to be able to hold the piece in place. So gluing just on the outsides, and you can see how it's building up towards the top, and with no glue in the center, because again, I know using this hot wire, I'm going to go through the center, so important to not have glue in the center, because you want to be able to easily go through there. And really just trying to create from the height or top of the pond, sort of a sloping downward, so you've got a more natural looking pond. So I'm going to turn this over, and I do this a lot where you can easily trace a certain section, and I needed a top to that area that covers up the water pump, and so that's what that piece is, and I'll build on top of that a little bit later. But I have a piece here where I've got it cut on one edge at a certain angle, and this is just sort of the beginnings of separating those two areas where you've got the pump and you've got the pond. And it's really, you wouldn't have to do this if you didn't care about camouflaging the pump, but my goal is to try to make it look as if, you've just got this waterfall that's existing in your living room or wherever, and you can't see the pump. So I've got this piece kind of juts out at close to a 45-degree angle, and because I guess I'm doing that because I know that those two prominent pieces you saw in the beginning, the pieces of ice, are coming out at an angle. So creating kind of a ramp here, because that is going to be the section that catches the water that comes out of the water pump. So I've got another little piece trying to work as close to that edge, but giving a little bit of a buffer there, and to create another couple pieces that will help direct the water down to that edge and then have it flow out into the pond. So beginning to cut out those two prominent pieces that are supposed to look like big pieces of ice that are jutting out at an angle, in which the water flows in between those two. So cutting, with the hot wire and trying to create some sort of sharp edges, And really, as I said before, going online and looking at pictures of icebergs, try to get an idea of what ice really looks like, and the way that ice falls on top of each other, sometimes at an angle that would be more realistic as to how an iceberg would actually look. So here I had been holding those two pieces down with nails instead of glue, just to make sure they were at the right position or angle that I wanted them in before I committed to putting them down with glue. So here with a magic marker, you can mark out where you want a piece to go without gluing it down, so then later you know exactly where they're supposed to go, so that you can, if you get called away from a project, which inevitably happens, for days at a time, you know exactly where you left off. So here, gluing in those two prominent pieces that the water flows in between, and here kind of cutting away, beveling the pond area so it doesn't look so blocky or square. And I've got a second little piece to try to assist in camouflaging the water pump. So it's going to go on at a little bit of an angle, and looks like this. So cutting out yet another piece that will be sort of another chunk of ice that is laying up against that one that's on the left. So again, marking it with a black marker, and then later gluing that on, and leaving some gaps here and there, just, as I said, looking at pictures of ice just to try to be as realistic as possible, but have a cluster here of 4 pieces that I had run out of the thicker foam. So I had to resort to using quite a bit of the thinner foam. This is really just insulation polystyrene, EPS polystyrene. So gluing those together and gluing then that entire cluster onto the right side there, and extending the base of the left side, going ahead and cutting that out, and then tracing around that, and not being real careful with the tracing, because you know that you kind of want the landscape to have, you don't want it to look exactly like the last piece that's underneath it. Having quite a few of the thinner pieces here just to build up mass or size, that knowing I'm going to go through those pieces later with the hot wire. Have another piece that will go on top that covers up the water pump. And doing the same thing with the right side. Got more pieces that kind of build that up so it kind of slopes downward and doesn't look as if it's just this straight up and down pond. So important to build up the other side of the structure as well. And here just there'll be several areas where you can either use foam, or in this case just using glue to put into some of these crevices or cracks or openings that will happen throughout the project. It's just a great way to kind of plug that up, because you don't want to have to plug that up with either the foam coat or the grout later. It's just easier to save on product and use glue or styrofoam. So cutting through those chunks and that I had glued together, and again trying to pay attention to the sort of topography of what an iceberg landscape is supposed to look like, with a little bit of the sharp edges here and there. So cutting through that big cluster that I had glued on before. So I'm waiting, obviously, overnight probably for some of these pieces before I cut into them. So I've got the top piece there and glued another little chunk on there, and then cutting off the base of the right side. And I've got another chunk that I'm going to put on as sort of like the fourth chunk of ice that has sort of fallen on top of each other. And here, using quite a few leftover pieces that just looked a little bit like jagged ice. I'm going to try to break up the pond line a little bit so it doesn't look so straight. So these are all leftover pieces, and found these, all over the place, and started using quite a few of those. I don't know if I cut out any that were not leftover pieces because they just looked like one I wanted already. But you can really try to dress up or enhance the look of the edges in and around. And of course, you can just use the hot wire to create some of those, or a knife, obviously. All right, time for intermission. As I've said in past videos, I feel compelled to share the most important thing one could ever know in this life, and that's that God is real, and this world and your life is not an accident. God sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to die and pay for all of our wrongdoings, or sins, so that we could be with him for all eternity. Think about your life on earth. It's 80 to 100 years, and that's if you're lucky. Compare that to 900 trillion years, which is really just the beginning of eternity. In the short time we're here on this earth, God is asking you to believe in his Son, accept the fact that you've done wrong and are in need of a Savior, and turn from doing the wrong you've done in the past, which is to say, repent of what you've done. There's scripture in the Bible, Proverbs 14:12, that says, "There is a way which seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death." This was certainly the path I used to be on years ago. Generally, we think, I haven't done anything too bad. It's not like I've committed murder or something worthy of being separated from God. And yet think of the simple act of telling a lie, which we've all done. Many of the world's judicial systems are entirely based on witnesses telling the truth. That's in a court of law, when one is under oath, when it counts, or when it matters. If a witness is found to have lied, they have to do what's called paying a debt to society, which is either a fine or time in prison. These are rules under human laws. How much more stringent would it be under God's laws? God, with his word, is essentially saying it counts all the time, not just when you're in a court under oath. He's basically saying you can't just do the right thing only when people are watching. The most loving act another individual can do for someone is to die for them, to save their life. That's exactly what Jesus did around 2,000 years ago, and he's waiting for you to call out to him at any point in your life. You could start by saying, "Jesus, I ask that you come into my life, completely change me from the inside out, give me new desires and a new direction and purpose for my life. I repent of my sins and beg your forgiveness for all of my sins, past and present. I believe that Jesus died for me, and I accept his free gift of salvation." After saying that, make it a point to get a Bible and start reading a little every day. Just as we have to feed our body every day, we also need to feed our mind and soul. Please start to take this seriously if you haven't already. Believe me, I've been on the other side of this issue and argument, and there's no doubt in my mind that the truth is found in Jesus Christ. Please think about this. Take the time to read the Bible. The Bible has more validity than any other ancient document. Every one of us will pass away someday. We will all spend way more time in the place we go to when we pass away than we ever did on earth. Whether you believe that's oblivion, heaven, or hell, isn't it worth your while to research where you may or may not wind up upon leaving this world? Thanks for listening. So here we have the Mortar Stage. So in the past, I've used non-sanded grout, but have used since probably 2011 foam coat from the hot wire foam factory, and this is designed for foam, so it's definitely better in how it adheres to EPS foam. And just follow the directions again from the hot wire foam factory, and I always add a little bit more water than what the directions suggest. So here, what I'm doing, obviously applying this, but what you want to do is try to get to the problem areas first while the project is still somewhat light. So unless you're wanting a really good workout for your forearms and biceps. With the certain problem areas, you'll see I'm having to kind of twist this around and put it on its end and on its side to try to get that foam coat into certain areas. And so obviously it's better to do this in the beginning when the project is not heavy at all, because once you get a full layer of that foam coat on, the weight of the entire structure will significantly go up, and it'll be quite tiring to try to get to some of these areas. So any area where you can just set it on its base and try to get to it, you want to leave to the end as a last stage when you're applying this. And because this is not meant for a living creature, and because foam coat is so good, I'm only applying one layer of this on, which should be sufficient. So for this top piece, the extra pieces that are small, you can just hold it over top of the bowl and the excess will drop in. So once you've got a layer and it's fully dry, I always tend to use a really fine grade sandpaper to try to buff out. And you want to use fine grade and use very light pressure, trying to buff out some of the sharp areas. And there will also be some very weak areas that happened because of the coating, and just going over the entire project to do that. So here, what I've got is usually I will do a test, and it's something that I highly recommend before you start painting and really spending an enormous amount of time trying to do a test at some point as to whether or not the water is going to flow and whether or not the physics of the waterfall is going to work. And so I'm going to apply this sealant, which I'll also use later, but this is really just for a temporary way of trying to make sure that you don't have a massive leak. It'll last for like 1 or 2 minutes, and you can really tell whether or not it's going to work or not. And then leaving it to dry for a good 72 hours. And this stuff is listed in the materials list video as well. But good idea to, at this stage, make sure that the waterfall is actually going to work, and that, sometimes you can tell that the water is flowing in some bizarre way, and you can tell then, I need to make this change or that. But here what I'm doing is removing the water. At this state, the structure is not very strong, and it's potential because the weight of that water is so much. It's much heavier than you might think with how much water that particular waterfall can hold. And it's a good idea to remove the water first, because if I were to try to pick this up and dump it in the bathtub, which is where I usually dump it, it could potentially make the project crumble, even though, it's probably wouldn't, but it's a good idea to do this. Take this or a sponge, remove as much water as you can while it's in this kind of weakened state. So here, moving on to the painting stage, and I've got a dollar store water bottle with about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of water. I usually never measure, actually never. And with this amount of white paint that you're seeing, so again, I never really measure. It's always kind of better to tend or have too much water. And this amount of blue. And so what I'm doing is trying to create a very light blue to try to create a sort of ice look to the base. And what I could have done is just applied pure white, because it's just a base color, and I ended up covering up quite a bit of this. But I thought it would be good to apply the first layer in this completely really bright and light blue, sort of an icy blue, and then add layers of white and a darker blue later. So then, of course, applying it to the other pieces as well, the top piece. And applying it to the underside, because you never know what is going to actually be completely visible when you've got this thing entirely done. So here, with another water bottle full, using more of a lighter blue, more leaning towards white, so you can work in layers. And of course, you can always, just using a paintbrush, apply, in this case, more of a white, sort of an off-white, And it really is just a process of layers upon layers. You can see here where I have the base of the really light blue and then the texture of the foam coat kind of pulling off what's a pure white and giving it a little bit of texture, making it look as if you've spent a little bit more time with the detail. In reality, it's just the texture pulling off the paint. So here with trying to suggest the shadows, and if you look at pictures of icebergs, they will usually have quite a bit of blue, especially in the shadows. So this is something, you know, definitely enhanced the look, and it kind of gives a separation between the planes and sections of the ice to have this blue. So kind of overdoing it with the blue here, knowing I'm going to go back and cover it up with a much lighter blue and just kind of work in these layers where adding a little bit too much blue and then going back in and sometimes adding another lighter shade of blue but not quite white, and sort of going back and forth. You can really see how it's defining those, you know, chunks of ice or separating those planes of ice in the sculpture. So here really having quite a bit of blue, knowing of course I'm going to go back with sometimes a pure white, and with the idea of not covering up everything, but having, you know, a little bit of white and a little bit of the strong blue showing through. And so here painting or going to paint the pond. So what I'll do, or what I'm doing, is painting the deeper, I guess, the water would be, is I'm going to have a darker blue. And then as I move up, it'll be a much lighter blue. You can see there on the brush, much lighter blue. And this is really done to just suggest depth in the water. So you've got a much lighter blue on the top, and just as you work downward, it is a much darker blue because your visibility wouldn't be as good as it gets deeper. So here, finished with the painting stage, you're going to use some of that same sealant that I used to do the test of the waterfall, and just using again another dollar store water bottle, and going to apply 4 coats of this to both pieces and the underside, and then ideally wait a good 72 hours in between for it to reach that full water repellent state. And this is a sealant that is going to handle splashes and, you know, drops of water, but is not necessarily going to have it be waterproof. So treating the back side of it and the underside, and then of course waiting 72 hours, and I've got it outside here to apply the silicone. And as I've said many times in past videos with waterfalls, silicone is safe when dry, but when wet it is extremely toxic, and the fumes alone, you really would not want this in your place. So I've got this outside and applying this everywhere, obviously, that water would or it would contact with water. So, and you want to kind of map out a good 3 hours. It might not take that long, but you want to map out a good 2 to 3 hours to apply this, depending, of course, I guess, on the size of your waterfall. You don't want to be in a hurry, because I'm kind of, as you can see, moving back and forth and, you know, going over the same area or section, you know, way more than once, just to try to make sure I've covered it. And, you know, I did end up having a leak in this, and what I think it was that I did not go like 2 inches above where I thought the water line was going to be. So one of the, you know, reasons for watching these videos is try to learn from my mistakes. What happened was it did not have a leak until I unplugged the water pump, and of course when you do that, all of the water that's constantly moving through the water pump is then no longer doing that, and of course the water line rises. And because of that, I think it had gone up because I had added a little bit of water to get a slightly deeper look to the pond, and had not covered that fully with silicone. So really, just as long as you're going above where you know the water line to be by about 2 inches, you'll cover yourself. If in fact you do then later add water to it so that your pond is deeper. is when you plug in that water pump, it'll, start sucking the water up, and your pond will essentially go down about a half an inch to an inch. So good idea to go above the water line by about 2 inches. And so I've got the entire structure in that container. So out there, it'll sit for a good 3 to 4 days to air out. And I used to raise cockroaches in that container. That's why it's got all those little air holes on the top. But that was a long time ago. So you want to have the thing air out and make sure that it is good and dry before you proceed to the next stage, which is applying that secret ingredient, the acrylic medium, that will create the ice look. So here I've got a plastic knife. I've sanded down the teeth because I wanted a smooth edge to the knife. And this is just another way of applying this acrylic medium that gives it that ice look. Obviously, you can use a brush. You'll see me using a brush later. But so this is intended to be mixed with acrylic paint to extend the dry time and to give it that glossy look. But as I found out with the winter waterfall, you can create icicles. And really just with this particular project, applying it pretty much everywhere, and in certain areas a little bit more to create that ice look. And it's just really giving a transparent, glossy look that when built up, when thin enough, becomes completely transparent. And what I ended up doing was working in layers. It was a little bit difficult to work with, but this obviously was not what it was designed to do. So the thinner the better, and then waiting for it to dry. And same process that I used for the winter waterfall to create the icicles here, which is I've got some wax paper, and then you can use a knife or a brush to basically try to create an elongated cone that creates an icicle. So, and then here, using a brush, which I think I found to be way easier than using the knife, but just yet another method to create an icicle. And I think I put probably 7 or 8 icicles on this, whereas I think Winter Waterfall had quite a few more. But continuing to apply that ice substance. So, like I say, you can kind of, as you go along, you really kind of learn it's a learning curve to it, in that you can really see it on the left there, starting to look more like ice because it's beginning to turn transparent. But trying to build in these sort of thin layers, and knowing which way, if you're, I guess, applying this in more of a thicker application, it's going to look more cloudy. So you can go between sort of that thin ice look and a slightly more cloudy look. Because if you look at pictures of icebergs, there are definitely quite a few variations to the ice. But I have the icicles here. They've dried. It takes a little while for them to dry and clear up. But you can see the edges there. You can take a pair of scissors and cut off those edges to try to get a slightly smoother look to the icicle. So here what I've done, it's not done yet, but I've put the water in, turn the pump on to try to get a feel for how the water looks, and whether or not the icicles, before I glue them on, whether or not they were going to be in the way, I guess, of the flow of the water, or just how it was going to look in general before I committed to gluing on the icicles. So I went ahead and got the water off, and using the same substance to create the ice, I used to glue on those icicles. So what you have to watch for is when this stuff dries, it tends to warp. So sometimes you'll wake up the next morning with an icicle that is pointed in a somewhat unnatural direction, whereas ideally you obviously want these to be pointed downward. So sometimes you might have to cut off one of the icicles and just start over, because there's kind of no rhyme or reason to whether or not it's going to start warping, one of your icicles so that the angle is completely unnatural. But applying them to not just where the water is coming out and into the pond, but in a few different areas, got the icicles in different spots just to sort of enhance the look. So I've got the top of where the water pump is, and this is where the two pieces are going to connect. And it's important to paint on a layer of sealant and then using white sand to essentially create a barrier for the two pieces, because when they connect, and then doing the same thing to the top piece, when they connect, if you don't have this barrier, because of the sealant being so tacky, they can tend to stick together. So then brushing that off the next day after it's dried. So having this barrier to the two pieces will hopefully eliminate the probability that the two will start to stick together. So here's something new I've started, and I would definitely recommend. I've got 3 to 4 of those super absorbent towels you see on TV. And really just obviously if you're going to spring a leak, it would be better for you to have quite a few of these super absorbent towels to catch the leak, and then you can try to figure out, what's going on with the leak. Have a this is the fogging unit, and I was going to say if you have a leak that's you can't quite find it, it's a good idea to just cover again maybe a quarter of the project and retest it, and then if that doesn't work, cover a different quarter of it so that you're not totally redoing the silicone application. So putting in the water after I've put in the pump, and there you have it, an Iceberg Waterfall. So like I say, I did spring a leak on this, but it was really had to do with me not applying silicone a good 2 inches above where I thought the water line was going to be. So good idea to do that. Like I say, this is something I would probably consider beginner towards intermediate, because the ice material kind of works by itself and the color scheme is so simplistic. So, but be sure and check out the intermission if you did not get the chance to hear that. And thanks for watching.